Happy New Year, everybody. I hope everybody had a Merry Christmas and a great New Year, and you're getting 2017 kicked off to a great start. So how many people out there are on Facebook? I am on Facebook, and on Facebook I belong to a number of groups, obviously, of various different disciplines, and surprise, surprise, I belong to a lot of Christian groups, Christian-oriented groups. Well, I was looking at a posting on one of these groups yesterday, and it was a young lady who was asking for advice. I won't go into the specific details or anything about that out of respect for her privacy, but she was looking for advice, relationship advice, about a gentleman that she was having feelings for. And keep in mind, this is a group where all the members are supposed to be, or professing to be, Christians. Well, one of the pieces of advice that she received, let's just say, made a lot of jaws drop. It was vulgar, and it was advocating something that is clearly not, shall we say, traditional Christian teaching on human sexuality. So the question then arises, how do you think people reacted? You're in a group of Christians. How would you think a group of Christians would react when they saw that kind of advice being given out purportedly by a Christian to another Christian? Well, I'm sure, as you can expect, there was a lot of outrage. Some might be described as anger. It's hard to tell in, social media where everything's just typed up. But as I look back on it, I reflected on it. Of course, needless to say, when I first saw that, my reaction was the same. I was like, really? This is Christian advice you're giving this person? And I gave my own bit of advice for whatever it's worth. I'm no expert by any means. But as I started reflecting back on it, you always examine your life and you look back and you say, well, could I have handled that differently? Or, even looking at, fellow Christians and the way they handled it, how should that situation have been handled? And I look back and, well, first, one thing that is very, very clear is that the advice, no matter how much you wait and reflect back on it, the advice that was given was definitely not in accordance with Jesus' teachings. But I started thinking a little bit at some of the way people interacted with this person. I started wondering, well, could we have done something a little differently? Meaning the person who gave the advice, not the person that was seeking the advice. There was a lot of good advice being given there, but the person who was seeking, who actually gave this inappropriate advice, how did we interact with that person? And I started wondering, you know what? We're on social media. We don't know this person at all right? But all we do know is that they claim to be Christian. But what that doesn't tell us is for how long. All right. And it got me to thinking about a movie that's coming out here in a couple of weeks, The Resurrection of Gavin Stone. I will preface this by saying I have no connection to this movie whatsoever, so this is not, I do not stand to profit by this shameless plug whatsoever. But I started thinking about one of the trailers and some of the YouTube videos I've seen in preparation for this movie. And there's a scene there where Gavin Stone, for those of you who don't know from the trailers, from what I've been able to gather, he's some kind of big movie star or celebrity who gets into legal trouble and has to do community service. And so he does community service at this church, and he starts out just doing manual labor, but then he finds out that they're having what I assume is a passion play. And he, being an actor, says, hey, I'm a good actor. I'm much better off acting than I am, mopping floors. And so he basically auditions for the role of Jesus Christ. But in order to do that, he basically tries to fool everybody into thinking he's a Christian when he's really not. So in any case, there's a scene in this movie where he's over at one of the fellow church members' houses, and they're all gathering around for dinner. I guess they've ordered a pizza, and the pizza gets delivered, and the friend turns to Gavin Stone and says, well, will you, initiate, how about you pray for us, saying grace, basically. Well, needless to say, Gavin Stone, not being a Christian, probably never said grace before in his life, but still trying to create the illusion that he is, has no idea how this is done. And so he actually, well, why don't we all take a knee? And he gives this, so everybody's kneeling around pizza, and he gives this really big, elaborate prayer, which is, let's just say, it's not typical of a typical sounding grace over a meal. Very little about the food in there. So it was kind of, everybody around him is kind of looking and smirking and like, okay, all right. But you know what they don't do? They don't, because they all think he's a Christian, probably a new Christian, not very experienced at this point. What they don't do is they don't jump on him. They say, Gavin, you were out of line. That was not how you say grace. All right. They kind of rolled with it a bit. Now, I'm not saying that we roll with it when someone, a new Christian, is advocating sin by any stretch of the imagination. We do have to correct it. We do have to stand up for what's right and what Jesus has taught. But the tone that we take with people, we've got to understand, look, for all I know, this guy on Facebook, he may be a Christian. He's giving really bad advice, but for all I know, he became a Christian yesterday. All right. He's brand new. He's still learning. And so we need to be patient. Now, we do need to be firm and we need to be stand up for what's right. But it occurs to me, in like all my apologetic endeavors, 1 Peter 3:15 tells us that when we're interacting with non-Christians, with non-believers, it says, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who, for the hope that you have. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So it tells us when we're interacting with non-believers to always use gentleness and respect. Why wouldn't we also do that when we're dealing with what we might call baby believers? So I don't know where this gentleman was in his walk of faith. I don't know if he even was a Christian, although I don't know why he would be wanting to belong to a Christian group if he wasn't. I do know he gave some bad advice. And I think the way we deal with that is we do need to use it as a teaching moment, but we need to be polite. And we need to be respectful, and we need to use that advice that's in 1 Peter 3:15, even when we're dealing with new Christians who, are not, let's face it, throughout our lives, we're supposed to become more and more like Christ. And so if you look at where you are in your life today, and you compare it to where you were in your walk with Christ a year ago, you should see development. You should see yourself becoming more and more Christ-like throughout your life. And if you don't see a change in yourself today versus where you were a year ago, then you need to do some reevaluation, because something's not right there. You're supposed to be growing. Well, what that means is, though, when we first become a Christian, we haven't grown much at all. And so we have to have patience. We need to be teaching moments. We want to try to come very hard not to come across as holier than thou. It's not that we're better than someone. We might be further along in our walk than someone else. But you know what? We were all there. All of us were there. So this is a teaching moment. It was an educational moment for me as I saw this come up out of the mouth of a purported Christian. That, you know what? We need to use opportunities like this as teaching moments for those that are not as far along in their faith walk as we are. But we also need to be humble and understand that there, but for the grace of God go I. We were all there at one point in time. And we need to be patient. And we need to use gentleness and respect when we're doing it. All right. So keep that in mind. That 1 Peter 3:15 command to use gentleness and respect doesn't just apply to interactions with non-believers. It can also apply to interactions with younger believers. And really, it's good advice for all interactions that we have, all social interactions out there in the world. Stand up for what's right, but always use gentleness and respect. All right. Thank you very much. Happy New Year again, everybody, and God bless.